I'm not on yet. Okay, there. Yeah. I'm deeply grateful to Rabbi Yosef Braha for having invited me to come to speak to all of you in Memphis, and literally, because of Chazak and TorahAnytime.com, literally throughout the world, on this very important night before Tainus Esther here in America, and also a night of tefillah and inspiration. This past week in Parshas Truma, there is a pasuk that was once interpreted in a most brilliant way by a great Talmud Chacham, Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan Spector, the Rav of Kovna. The pasuk is describing the Kruvim, the cherubs that were on top of the Aron Kodesh in the Mishkan and also in the Beis HaMikdash. And if you want to look it up, it's in Shemais Chafei Pasuk Chaf, and it tells us like this: V'hoyu hakruvim, the kruvim porsei kenafayim lamayla, the wings spread heavenward, upward, and yet the pasuk tells us upneihem ish elochiv. We know that on bottom of the wings there were two faces. Some say it was the face of a little boy and the face of a little girl. And the pasuk tells us, "Upneihem ish elochiv." They were facing each other. So Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan said, this pasuk defines what a yid is all about. Persei knafayim lamayla. Your hands have to be spread heavenward. In our tefillah, which we will talk about tonight, in our dedication to the mitzvahs, to the learning of Torah, we face HaKadosh Baruch Hu with our hands spread upward. And yet, that may be important ben Adam lamokaim, between man and God, but we can never forget Upeneihem ish elochiv. The idea of ben Adam lachaveroi, one person facing the other and caring for them. And tonight, that's what we will talk about. We will talk about tefillah, which really combines both things, spreading our hands heavenward, but yet davening not only for ourselves, but for each other. Upneihem ish elochiv. The Maral tells us something fascinating. Where does the word tefillah come from? We all say we daven tefillah, we say tefillah. What does the word tefillah mean? What is its origin? And the Maral tells us something fascinating. We all remember the very tragic story how Yaakov Avinu missed his son Yosef for 22 long years. His beloved son, he hadn't seen him, he did not believe he was alive. And then finally, he came to Mitzrayim. And near his death, Yaakov says to his son Yosef, again, Bereshis Memches Pasuk Yud Aleph, Vayomer Yisrael el Yosef. Yisrael says to Yosef, Ra'oi fanecha, seeing your face, loi filolti. You hear that word filolti? Rashi says, you know what it means? Loi milani libi lachshav machshava. I never even had a thought process that I would see you again. Zog the Heilige Maral, you know what filolti means? Tefillah? It's a thought process. That's what he says. Filolti is Lashon Machshava. And that's really what tefillah is all about. Of course, if a person davens and verbalizes the words, even if he doesn't know what he's talking about, there is some credit to that. But really, what tefillah is all about, as we will learn tonight, is a thought process, a conversation with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's the essence of tefillah. As a matter of fact, the Shloh HaKodesh writes, Sheyechadesh divrei tachnunim v'shailos ubakoshes b'ktzas brochas hatfila imloi b'kulon. You're supposed to make up, you're supposed to create words in the davening. Of course you say all the Hebrew words, but you will ask the wonderful Rabbanim that were on this program tonight, and they will tell you where you can add your own words to the tefillah. Again, we don't skip any of the words that the Anshe Knesset Agdola wrote for us. But it's a conversation. You can add words. And you take a look in the Art Scroll Sidurim, and you'll see in Shema Kolenu where you can add, and you'll see in Rifa'enu where you can add. And you know what Rabbi Yehuda Chassid writes? Ukeshet Tispalel, when you daven, Toisif al kol bracha ubracha. Add in every bracha. Don't we all know people that are sick? Don't we all know people that need parnasa that we should daven for them in the same bracha? Don't we all have to make decisions in business and in family life and with our children that in Atachayne Liyodam Das? As we will hear a great story later, what does it mean to daven to Hashem and ask for wisdom and saying the right things? So Tefillah is a conversation. And what I would like to share with you is a beautiful, delightful story about the Satmar Rebbe. Now, the Satmar Rebbe was not only a Godel B'Torah, greatness in Torah, but he also had a great sense of humor. I'll tell you a little joke. It has nothing to do with the shir, but just so that you'll see what kind of person he was. He was once collecting money for one of his Torah institutions, and one chassid gave him $47. So the Rebbe said, $47? Where did you get that amount? He said, Rebbe, it's begematria, it's equal. The numerical value of your name, Yoel, is equal 47. So the Rebbe said to him right away, I'll say it in Yiddish and I'll translate. He said, in the Heim flecht mich riffen Yoelish. In the old country, they called me Yoelish. You could bet that chassid had to pay an extra $300 for that shin. So the Rebbe had a light sense of humor. And he was once at a chasana, once at a wedding. And there was a batchen. Now, those of you who have been to Hasidic weddings know that there is a batchen. In the beginning of the wedding, he's very serious as he talks to the chassan. But in the middle of the chasana, he does a lot of shtick. He makes many, many things that are cute and adorable. And one batchen went over to the Rebbe, and he said to him, and I'm telling you, you can't ask this to every Rebbe, but to the Satmar Rebbe, he was able to ask it. Could I imitate you? Do you mind if I imitate you? And the Rebbe said, no, that's fine, good, go ahead. And so everybody was dancing and they sat around and the Rebbe was placed in the middle to watch how this Batchen was going to imitate him. And the Batchen took out a talus from his bag of tricks and he put it on his head the way the Rebbe did, and he started davening exactly the way the Rebbe did, with his high-pitched voice and his Hasidic accent, and everyone was hysterical because it was so perfect and so exact. Everyone was hysterical except the Rebbe. The Rebbe's mouth dropped open. He couldn't believe this imitation. It was so exact. It was so perfect. And suddenly he started crying. Now, when the Batchen was doing his shtick, he didn't realize right away that the Rebbe was crying. He was watching how everyone was hysterical with laughter. But then when he saw the Rebbe's face, he stopped immediately. And he said, "Oh, Rebbe, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to make the Rebbe cry." And the Rebbe said, "That has nothing to do with you." So he said, "So why was the Rebbe crying?" Listen to what the Rebbe said. Listen to this ingenious remark. He said, "I saw how you were imitating me. It was so perfect. It was so exact that it occurred to me that sometimes when I'm davening, I'm only imitating myself." You know what that genius remark means? Sometimes we come to shul and we have a lot of things on our mind. So you can't just stand around the shul and do nothing, right? So what do? You turn the pages, you say the words. But you're just going through the motions. You're only imitating yourself. So if the great Rebbe could say that sometimes he was only imitating himself, what in the world should we say about ourselves when we daven? Sometimes we're also just going through the motions. So how are we going to change that? I'll tell you what I think. You know what I think? I think every single one of you watching tonight, whether it's in Memphis or all around the world, and I would never ask you to do anything that I don't do myself, and that is every one of us, every man, woman, and child, if possible for the children, have your own siddur and take it wherever you go, if you can. And if Shabbos, you have your own siddur in shul, that's fine. Your own siddur at home or wherever. And you know why you should have your own siddur? Because you can underline in it. And you can highlight expressions. And when you hear a beautiful pshat in Tefillah, or in the words and you underline it, your siddur becomes your best friend. Because every day when you say those words and you see them highlighted in yellow or what are the first letters of those words? Hey, Lamed, Lamed. That's Hallel. Haroife l'shvurei lev. Turn it around, Rabbi. Haroife l'shvurei lev means Hallel. That's the greatest praise that you could say about Hashem and about anybody. They are people that care and they heal the brokenhearted. So in my siddur, when I have that underlined, which I do, and I see it in the morning, I'm thinking, that's my role. That's my job. That's what I've got to do. I've got to be like Hashem. Haroife l'shvurei lev. If you don't have it underlined, you don't even realize you said those words. But once it's underlined and it's highlighted, oh my, that sidur's talking to you. And that goes on and on with different expressions and different thoughts. That's a way to make a conversation with Hashem. When you have your own siddur and you can make a note and write a meaning of words. And so many times we don't know these words. And I'll tell you another thing. And you will see in a moment how the Megillah is so intertwined with Tefillah, you won't believe it. You know what the Vilna Gaon said? It's so brilliant. Write this down. Say it over at the Purim Suda. Look at it during the Megillah, you won't believe it. If you look in Perik Tes, the Megillah says to Pasuk Chafei, it's recapping the events that happened. And it says, Ubavoya lefnei HaMelech, when she came in front of the king, that was Esther, came in front of Achashverosh. Omar im Sefer, he said to the scribes, Yoshuv machshavtei hara, they should turn away the evil thought that Haman had. Listen to how the Goyen understood these words, and we're going to learn a great lesson tonight. Ubavoya lefnei HaMelech, when you come in front of the king, you're davening in front of the Melech Malchei Amlachim, you're davening in front of Hashem. Omar im Sefer, daven in a siddur. Don't daven by heart. Don't think that you know everything by heart. And you know what happens when you daven in a siddur? Yoshev machshavtei hara, you're going to push away the evil thoughts because, you're going to try to think of, who won the ball games. Right? What's going on in Eretz Yisrael? You're going to be thinking of 100 different things, as many of us do during Tefillah. But if you're looking in the Sefer, Yoshev machshavtei hara. So tonight, we've already said two things that I think that we can all do. One, get your own siddur. Underline in the siddur. And second, daven in a siddur. Say the words of Shemay Nesrei in a siddur. Say the words of Ashrei in a siddur. The words of Aleinu in a siddur. You're going to see new pshatim in the words that you never even thought of. Well, if you're davening 80 miles an hour, how in the world are you going to think of what you're saying? But that's a way to remember about davening and the words. Now, I want to share with you one of the greatest insights that I ever heard in my life. And it is so electrifying, as you will see in just a few moments. We will see what Purim is. We will see what davening is. And we're going to see something ingenious. The Arizal makes a very, very unusual statement. If I were to ask you throughout the year, which are the two holidays that are totally the opposite from each other? I'm sure we would all say Purim and Yom Kippur. Purim this, singing, dancing, drinking, food, good times, dressing up. The good times, right? Yom Kippur, we're all so serious. We're davening in shul a whole day, fasting, no eating, no drinking, serious thought. And yet, the Arizal says that Yom Kippur is called Yom Kippurim. The day should be like Purim. What does that mean? They are totally the opposite. What does the Arizal mean? Obviously, there's a great lesson here. So I want to tell you a little story. Some of you who know me personally know that ever since 2003, I've had the great schus to be able to take people, by now it's over 1,000 people, to different places where Yiddishkeit flourished. We've gone to Lithuania, gone to Poland, we went to Greece, we went to Spain, we went to Ukraine, Italy, many, many different places. And each place we tried to learn the history of the Yidden that were there, and the tzaddikim that lived there, and the shuls that were prayed in. Now, when we went to Spain, the one who led the trip together with me was a wonderful person, originally from England, now a great teacher in Eretz Yisrael. His name is Rabbi Menachem Nissel. And we were talking about the Spanish Inquisition and how the Jews had to run away from Spain. This was, of course, when we were in Spain. And he said something very, very interesting. You know, first of all, we know that there were many, many people that had to run away from Spain because of the anti-Semitism. We know that in 1492 on Tisha B'Av. They ran. But there were many people that remained, and they hid their Yiddishkeit. Now, I want to show you something. You should never, ever use the word that I'm going to use now, and I'm only using it to show you something. Those people who hid their Yiddishkeit, many people call them Marranos. Never, ever use that word. You look up on Google, you know what Marrano means in Spanish? Look it up. It means pig. Never call those Yidden who hid their Yiddishkeit a Marrano. Chas v'shalom. That was a nasty word that the Spanish people used against the Jews. The real word to use is conversos. Okay, they converted. It looked like they converted to Catholicism or Christianity, but they certainly were Jews hidden. So now, Rabbi Nissel asked the question. Every person has to have a hero. Every person has to have somebody that they look up to. So he asked the conversos, who was their hero? Who was the greatest converso in Jewish history? And of course he answered the question himself. And he said, Esther HaMalka. That's right. And that's what the Pasuk tells us. Take a look at Megillas Esther, Perik Beis, Pasuk Yud. Lo higida Esther es amo v'es moiladata. She didn't say where she came from, right? Nobody knew. Ki Mordechai tziva ala asher lo yisagid. Mordechai told her, don't you dare say that you're Jewish. So in a sense, it looked like she converted, right? She was a Persian in Achashverosh's palace. So she was the hero of the conversos. Now, Rabbi Nissel mentioned that the Avud Raham asks a question. And I'm telling you, after I heard this question, I took out my Rosh Hashanah Machzer and my Yom Kippur Machzer, and I underlined these words, as you'll see in a second. When you daven Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, there seems to be an extra word that is repeated over and over and over in every single Shemoneh Esrei of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. You know what that word is? Uvachein. Watch this. Uvachein yiskadei shimcha Hashem Elokeinu. And in this manner, Hashem, your name should be sanctified. Uvachein tein pachtecha. Hashem, and in this manner, there should be awe on all of your creations. Uvachein tzadikim yiru v'yismachu. And in this manner, the righteous will see and rejoice. And the Avuram asks a question. Why do you need the word uvachein? Even if you didn't have the word uvachein, the tefillah would still make sense. Yiskadei shimcha Hashem Elokeinu. Your name should be holy. Tein pachtecha Hashem Elokeinu al kol masecha. Give awe on all creation. Tzadikim yiru. What's the word uvachein in this manner? And he answers something fabulous. What happened? Esther is told by Mordechai, you got to go into the king. And Esther says, Mordechai, what are you talking about? Take a look at Esther, Pasuk, Perik, Dalet, Pasuk, Yud Aleph. Any person that goes into the king without permission can be killed. Now, Chazal teach us, and Mefarshim say that every time when it says the word HaMelech in the Megillah, it's a reference to Hashem, who is the ultimate Melech. Now watch this. So she's afraid to go into the king, right? So what does she tell to Mordechai? Megillas Esther, Peri Dalet Pasuk Dezayin. She says, Leich Kenoises Kol HaYehudim, gather all the Jews that are in Shushan, and you guys should fast. Don't eat and don't drink for 3 days. V'gam ani v'nairoisai otzum kain, and me and my maidservants, we will also fast. And then you hear this to this word, uvachein. She says that word, uvachein. In the Megillah it says uvachein. And in this manner, Avai el HaMelech, I'm going to come to the king. That's what the Avodram says. Just like she was afraid to come to the king. Every time you say uvachein and Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, underline it in your machzor, what you're saying is Esther's uvachein. I'm afraid to come to the king. This past year has been a difficult year. I may have done things that are not appropriate. How am I coming into the king? Uvachein. I'm afraid. Uvachein, Avai el HaMelech. And in this manner, I'm going to come to the king. And you know what happens? Watch this. When the king sees her, the Pasuk tells us, in Perek Hey Pasuk Beis, the king sees her in the Chotzer. He says, my dear queen, come. And she finds favor in his eyes, and he gives her the Sharbat Hazov. He gives her the golden scepter. And what does he say to her? Up to half the kingdom, whatever you want. Oh, so she got her tefillah answered. That's what the Arizal says. Yom Kippurim. On the day of Yom Kippur, we want it should be like Purim. We're afraid to go in, uvachein, because we may have had a difficult year spiritually. And now what happens? Achashverosh gave her the golden scepter, and he gave her what she wanted. The Jews were saved. That's what we're saying is Yom Kippurim. That the day should be like Purim. That we are hesitant, we are afraid, but we know we're going to get answered. We have that confidence because Hashem loves us, as the speaker mentioned earlier. That's really what it's all about. Now I want to tell you something that my son Avram Zelik said many, many years ago. I remember he said this, I couldn't get over it. He was a little boy. It was before his bar mitzvah. But he said something that is so magnificent that I think that this will teach us the essence of what Purim is all about. We all know, the Pasuk tells us that we have to give umeshloyach monos ish l'rayehu. We have to give gifts, right, of food, a meal, one to our friend, ish l'rayehu. So my son said the word ish is b'gematria, the numerical value 311. The word l'rayehu to your friend is also equal 311. That shows, he said, v'yahavta l'reyacha kamoicha. Ish, a person is 311, his friend is also 311. That's what Purim is all about. And my dear friends in Memphis and all over the world, I want to read to you a Rambam that is so important, maybe this year, more than any other year. You know what the Rambam says in Hilchos Megillah? Hilchos Megillah, Perik Beis Halacha Zayin. He says, Mutav la'odam laharbais b'matonis evyonim. It's better to give more money to poor people melaharbais b'sudasai than to have a big meal ub'shloyach monos l'rayehu than giving shalach monos. Of course you have to give shalach monos, and of course you have to give the suda. But it's more important, the Rambam is telling us to give money to the poor. And this year we know, Nebuch, all the Rabbanim can tell you better than we can. They know who's poor in Memphis. They know who's poor in every single city. All the Rabbanim know. Go, Tiny Esther, go to the Rav's house and give him money like you never gave before. Because that's what the Rambam is saying. There's no greater love and joy for Hashem than when he sees that his people are caring for each other. Caring for almanas, for widows, for single moms. And yes, even single dads. And for Yisaimim and Yisaimais. That's what we have to do this year, perhaps more than any other year. But I want to tell you something. When we are talking now about Ish L'Rayehu, I want to share with you some phenomenal stories. What does it mean to care for each other? All of you surely know that just about 2 months ago, one of the Gedolei Hador, or if not even the Gadol Hador in America, passed away, and that was Rabbi David Feinstein, Zeichat Tzadik V'Kodesh L'Vracha. Rabbi David, of course, was the son of Rabbi Moshe, and any Rav, any place, wherever he was, if a Rav was afraid to paskin on certain shilas, they called Rabbi David. He wasn't afraid to paskin on anything. Now, I knew him, I can't say I knew him well. As a Mael, I had numerous brisin in Tveres Yerushalayim, where he was the Rosh Hashiva and he was the Sandik, but I can't say that I knew him well. And of course, when he passed away, I listened to many of the eulogies, to the Hespedim. And then when it was the 30-day memorial service, the Shloshim, in one of the local schools here in Shevach High School, they asked me to come to speak about Rab David. So I did some research. Not only what I heard from the Hespedim, but I spoke to numerous people who knew him well. And I want to share with you 3 stories. Listen to these stories. You will see what does it mean, Pneim Ishal Ochiv, as Rabbi Krohn Spector said about the Kruvim, and we will see what Ishla Reyehu is all about. Listen to this. This story happened many years ago. It was on Rosh Hashanah. It was the middle of laning, and a young man sees that his wife came in to shul, and she came with their baby, and she had to take care of the baby. She needed a private place. And the only place that was available was Rab David Feinstein's office. So during laning, this fellow goes over to Rab David, and it says, Rosh Hashiva, I'm sorry to bother you, but my wife has to take care of the baby, and we need a private place. Can she borrow your key to the office, and she can go in there with the baby? And Rab David said, yeah, of course. And he gave him the key. Fine. Laning is finished, and all of you know that after laning comes Tkiyah Shofar, and the Olam is saying Lam Natseach 7 times. Now, Rab David was not the Baltakeya. He was not the one who blew Shofar. He was the Makri. He was the one who called out the Koilos, Tkiyah, Shram, Trua, Tkiyah. But when they finished saying Lam Natseach, he turns to the Baltakeya. He says, wait, don't start the Psukim yet. Don't start the Psukim or the Brachas. And he's looking around. Nobody knows who he's looking for. There's 300 people in the Beis Medrash. Who is he looking for? Finally, he sees that young man. He calls him up. Motions, he should come next to him. And he says to him quietly, tell me, is your wife finished in the office? And he says, yeah, Rosh Hashiva, yeah, she's finished. He says, okay, now we can start the Psukim. The Rosh Hashiva, the Gadol Hador, he's got 300 people in his Beis Medrash. Who's he thinking about? He's thinking about that woman who came to shul, and if she misses Tkiyah Shofar, how's she going to get it later today? That's Pnei Mishal Ochiv. That's Ishla Reyehu. That's what Purim is all about. Listen to this story. It's amazing. It's at night. They're about to daven Ma'ariv in Tveres Yerushalayim. And a fellow comes into the yeshiva. He walks over to Rab David and he says, Rosh Hashiva, I know they're going to daven Ma'ariv soon, but could I ask you a very complicated shayla right after Ma'ariv? And Rab David says, yeah, of course. And then Rab David looks at his watch and he says, there's a minute yet before Ma'ariv. Could you please begin to ask me the shayla? Guy was surprised. I mean, how much could he ask? He said it's a complicated shayla, but that's what the Rosh Hashiva wants. So he began asking him the shayla, and less than a minute later, somebody calls Avahu Rachum, and everybody davens Ma'ariv, including the Rosh Hashiva and this person. Afterwards, Rab David is waiting for the fellow. He comes over. He repeats everything he said before. He asks him the shayla. Rab David thinks for a moment, and he gives him the answer. And the guy's very happy. And then as he's about to leave, he says to Rab David, Rebbe, I hope you don't mind if I ask you a question. Before Ma'ariv, we had only 1 minute before Ma'ariv, and the Rosh Hashiva knew that. So why did you ask me to ask the question? You knew I couldn't ask you the whole shayla in that 1 minute. Listen to what Rab David said. Rab David said, you said it was a complicated shayla, and I knew that in Shemoneh Esrei I'm going to be davening Ata Chayne Li Odam Das, that Hashem should give me wisdom. So I wanted to hear what the shayla was all about, so that when I daven Ata Chayne Li Odam Das, that Hashem should give me wisdom, I could focus in what wisdom I need on what topic. I mean, that's unbelievable. I guarantee you that by that time, Rab David had already answered 10,000 shaylas in his life. But this man said it's complicated. And I'm davening Ata Chayne Li Odam Das. He's thinking about what he's saying in Shemoneh Esrei. Hashem, I need wisdom. That's amazing. And here's the best story of all that I heard of Rab David. I love this story. And I'm telling all of you that are watching, wherever you are, ask this question at your Purim Suda. You will be amazed at the answers that you will get. But watch this. Here in New York, in Brooklyn, there's a fellow who's got a newspaper, like a family type of newspaper. His name is Ari Hirsch. And every once in a while, he will take maybe 50 public figures. He will take Rosh Hashivas, he will take Rabbanim, he will take musicians, he'll take speakers, and he'll ask them the same question. Everyone, the exact same question. And then a few weeks later, he prints in his paper the answers that everybody gave. And of course, everybody who was asked the question, and everybody wants to see what everybody else answered. So, 2-3 years ago, he called me and he asked me this question. And he said he was asking it to many people. The question was, and ask your family, and I wish I could see you personally because I would love to hear some of the answers that you would give, and maybe I could use it the next time I tell the story. The question was, if you had any 3 people that you could invite to dinner at your dinner table at night, any 3 people from Adam Arisha until today, which 3 people would you invite? Everybody, think about that for a second. Who would you invite? Well, I'll tell you what I said. I said I would invite David HaMelech. David HaMelech went through every experience in life. Anything you wanted to know about life, he could answer you. The second one I said was Rashi. To me, Rashi was the most compassionate and the most caring and the most gentle person. And he knew everything. He certainly knew all the Rashis. He wrote them. So he certainly knew Kol HaTorah Kula because he wrote the commentary, and he certainly knew Shas, and he knew Medrash, any Tanakh, anything you want, you could ask him. Right? He knew it all. And the third one, me personally, I said Reb Chaim Moshe Grusinski. Reb Chaim Moshe was like, to me, the Zayda of Klal Yisrael. He was the Gadol Hador of Vilna when the Chavetz Chaim was in Poland, and they were like the co-Gedolei Hador at the time. Fine, I sent in my answers. A few weeks later, Ari Hirsch calls me up. He says, Rabbi Krohn, make sure you get the paper next week because all the answers are going to be there. Well, I couldn't hold myself back. I said, Ari, you got to tell me, who gave you the best answer? He said, Rab David Feinstein. I said, you asked this question to Rab David Feinstein? He said, yeah, I asked everybody. You will never believe what he said. When he asked Rab David Feinstein, which 3 people would you invite to your house, home for dinner? You know what he said? 3 poor people. Could you faint from that answer? 3 poor people. Everybody, including me, was thinking, boy, if I had David HaMelech in my house, I'd have Rabbi Abel from Torah Anytime come with his camera. And he would video. If I had Rashi in my house, I'd call all my kids and grandchildren. Look who's coming to my house. Everybody would be thinking about themselves. That's not Rab David. He's thinking what he could do for other people. Pneim ish al achiv. Ish l'reyehu. That's what it's all about. That's what Ben Adam l'chaveira is all about. And I'll tell you one more thing. And then we'll end with a great thought and a great story. Just recently I heard this story. It is so phenomenal. I heard it from the person to whom it happened. This woman today is a doctor, a dermatologist, a frum woman. She has 4 kinder, and she told me this story. This story goes back more than 30 years. She was living in Florida with her parents, and her parents decided to go on Aliyah. They moved to Eretz Yisrael. So she decided she's coming to New York, because what's she going to do in Florida alone? And she moved in with another frum girl, and she lives in Manhattan. She was hoping she'd get a better shidduch here in New York than in Florida. And she would go to medical school here, and maybe she would find a better job. And 2 months after she was in New York, she met a fellow from Lakewood, and they became engaged. She became a kala. 2 weeks after the engagement, she decides she's going to go to Lakewood for Shabbos, to spend Shabbos with the chassan. Now, 30 years ago, that was before the internet. So she couldn't go online and find out what the bus schedule was at Port Authority or Penn Station. So she had to make a couple calls. It took a while until she finally got the schedule. And she realized that she's got to get there a certain time because otherwise, it's a long trip from New York to Lakewood by bus. Now, she was from Florida. She didn't know the train system, so she got lost. And by the time she got to Port Authority, There was only one bus left that would get her to Lakewood on time. And she runs to the booth where they're selling the tickets to New Jersey, and there is such a long line, and she's thinking, how in the world am I ever going to get this ticket to get on this bus? Look at this line. How am I going to get this ticket? I'm not going to make it on time. And she's standing there online, and she's going crazy. All of a sudden, a frum-looking guy comes over to her. He says, excuse me, you going to Lakewood? She says, yeah. He says, here's a ticket. Get on the bus. She says, here's a ticket. What do you mean? Where did you get this ticket? He said, it's an extra ticket. She says, what do you mean it's an extra ticket? He takes out another ticket. He says, I've got my ticket. She said, where'd you get the extra one? He said, I have children in Lakewood. I don't go there every week. But whenever I go, especially if I'm going on a late bus, I always buy an extra ticket. Because what if there's going to be somebody like you, a from person online? How are they going to get onto the bus on time? So I always buy an extra ticket. She says, every time you do this? She said, no. Only when I'm very late and I'm going to make that last bus, I buy an extra ticket. She says, can I pay you? He says, no, of course not. She says, I want to thank you. Who are you? What are you, Mr. Rabbi? He says, my name is Greenwald, but you can call me Ronnie because that's what everybody calls me. Now, for those of you out there who knew Ronnie Greenwald, all of a shalom, you know that he was the ultimate Baal Chesed, with Sharansky and everybody else that he did Chesed for all over the world. But even if you didn't know him, listen to that Chesed, it's unbelievable. He's going to Lakewood, he's not thinking about himself. Pnei Mishalochiv, Ish L'Rayehu, he's thinking about somebody else. We have to become like that on Purim. That's what Purim is all about. Uniting, being together, davening, parsik and the final l'mayla, but pnei mishalachim, we daven for each other. And so I want to tell you one more fabulous pshat, and then we'll end with a great story. I want to tell you this pshat because it's brilliant from my Rabbi, Rabbi David Cohen. Nebuch, last week he was rushed to the hospital, but Baruch Hashem, he's okay. I saw him today in his house, and he's much better, Baruch Hashem, but it should be a schus for his refuah shlema, David ben Esther Malka. He asked like this. We know that it says in Megillas Esther, Perek Tes Pasuk Chav Zayin, Kimu v'kiblu haYehudim. What does that mean? They fulfilled and they accepted. The Jews did. Now, so the Gemara tells us in Shabbos Peiches Amud Aleph, Kimu mashe kiblu kvar. They fulfilled that which they accepted. There was a new Kabbalah Satira on Purim. So Rabbi David asked a great question. We know that the only way the Yidden were able to get the Torah at Har Sinai, the Pasuk tells us in Shemais Yutes Pasuk Beis, Vayichan Sham Yisrael, Klal Yisrael rested. And Rashi asked, what do you mean Vayichan? Yichan is Lashon Yachid, that's singular. It should have said Vayachanu, they rested. So Rashi says, wait. It means Ki'ish Echad B'Leiv Echad. They were one heart, one mind, one soul. Because there was such great unity. That's why they got the Torah. That's why it says at Lashon Yachid. So my Rebbe Rab David asked, if that's the case, that you had to have the Achdus, and you had to have the unity to be Makabel the Torah. Where do we see in the Megillah that they had that Achdus? Where do we see that they had that unity? And he said something, I know you're not going to believe it, you got to look at it inside, you will see the genius of his answer. Take a look at Esther, Perek Tes, Pasuk Chav Zayin. We read it, Kimu v'kiblu. That's not what it says. It says Kibel. It doesn't say Kiblu. We read it with a shuruk under the lamed. So it's Kiblu, but it's really Lashon Yachid, Kibel. That's that Vayichan. That's the same thing. That shows they accepted it as one because there was unity. And that's the purpose of our getting together tonight. To daven for each other, to care for each other, and to celebrate Purim as good as we can. And let's not forget the Rambam. Matanos Lavyanim this year more important than any other year. More Matanos Lavyanim than Shalach Manas and the Big Suda. That's what Purim is all about. Tefillah. And we know, Chazal teach us, anything that you ask for on Purim you can get. Hashem opens his hands and is ready to give to everyone. So I want to end with this fabulous story, which is the greatest COVID story I know, and shows us how great we could all be. This story happened to this woman who told me the story herself. Her name is Mrs. Devorah Monk, and she lives in Lakewood, New Jersey. Now, last year, just about at this time, when COVID was beginning, and especially after Purim, when Nebuch, so many people were dying, and the pandemic was spreading like wildfire, everybody knew that many, many old people are going to have to be at the Seder themselves. Now, Mrs. Monk had moved to Lakewood about 5-6 years ago together with her husband, but shortly after they moved, Nebuch passed away. He got sick and he passed away. Not from COVID, this was 6 years ago. But she had her children and grandchildren in Lakewood. And Shabbosim, either they would go to her or she came to them or whatever. But Paysach, she was going to have to be alone. And that was very daunting. So she told me that she has wonderful neighbors. I spoke to the neighbors, but they don't want their name mentioned, so let's call them the Beckers. And Mrs. Becker comes over to Mrs. Monk and says, listen, I know you're going to have to be alone at the Seder, but look, your dining room window faces our living room window, and there's only a little garden between our homes. So why don't we do this? We can have the Seder together. You sit by your dining room window at your dining room table. We'll move our dining room table into our living room, and we'll have the Seder. We'll keep the living room window open. You'll be able to hear us. And we can have the windows open, and we'll share the Seder together. And Mrs. Monk told me, she said to them, you would do that for me? She said, of course. Our children love you. You're like a bubby to them. What's the question? Of course we'll do it. Now, watch this. The next morning, Mr. Becker calls Mrs. Monk. And he says, you know, my wife told me that she invited you, that we should have the Seder together. But I'll tell you the truth, he said, I don't want to try it the first time Seder night. Because what if it doesn't work? How are we going to fix it in time for the second Seder? So let's have a trial run. Let's do it Shabbos HaGadol. Could you imagine? Shabbos HaGadol is a few days before Yontif. So I'm going to move my dining room table into the living room, and you sit by your dining room window with your dining room table. We'll open up the windows and we'll have the meals together, so to speak, and see if you could hear us. And sure enough, she heard his Kiddush, and she heard the kids singing Zmiris. It was beautiful. So they knew, wow, this Seder is going to work. Imagine, to do a trial run. Then, she told me a couple hours before Pesach, there's a knock on the door. The kids, the Becker kids, are there with the Seder plate, with the Zroya, with the karpas, with the salt water. It's unbelievable. Not only did they have a trial run, but they gave her a Seder plate as well. And the Seder was fabulous. It was beautiful till 1 o'clock in the morning. It was so special. 1:15 in the morning, she gets a knock on her door. 1:15 in the morning. She's one. Who's coming here? 1:15. Eliyahu Novi came already a half hour ago. Who's coming now? She opens up the door. It's her kids. It's her kids and her grandchildren. They stopped their Seder and they walked 20 minutes to her house. They wouldn't come inside. And they said, Oma, that's German people, that's how they call the grandmother. Oma, how was your Seder? She said, how was my Seder? It was fabulous. She said, her son said, what do you mean fabulous? She said, you know, Daddy used to sing certain nigunim. I had no idea that the Beckers were German people. And they knew all the nigunim. They sang the same nigunim that Daddy sang all the years. And she told me an amazing thing. I didn't know this, that German people at the end of the Seder, they sing Adon Elam, Yigdal, and Ein Kelekenu. She said that's what they sang. And her son Yehuda starts laughing. And Mrs. Devorah Monk said to her son Yehuda, why are you laughing? He said, Ma, I didn't want to tell you, but a couple days ago the Beckers called me and they asked me if I could make a voice recording of all the nigunim that Daddy sang. And like this, he and their children, they would learn the songs so that they would be able to sing them at the Seder, so you would feel comfortable. Could you go crazy from that? Mika Amcha Yisrael. Boy, that's unity. Oh, if we had Yidden like that all over the world, Mashiach would be here tomorrow. Let's daven. Let's be united. Persek and Afayim L'mayla. Let's raise our hands to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in Tefillah, in commitment to mitzvahs, in commitment to Torah. But let's never forget the Pneim Ish Alochiv. Hashem should bench you. Rabbi Yosef, your wonderful Kailal and all the wonderful Rabbanim you have in Memphis. I hope that one day I'll be able to get there personally and we'll be able to speak to each other without masks, without social distancing. And we'll be able to embrace and sing and dance together and go to Eretz Yisrael together with Mashiach. Hashem should bless every single one of you. You should have a Freilich Purim, a safe Purim. Let's make a Kiddush Shem Shemayim. Let's be careful in everything the governments want us to be careful in. Let's be Erlich Yidden so that Hashem and Klal Yisrael will be proud in each and every one of us. Thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you for listening.